Our guest today is the Chief Executive Officer for the United Neighborhood Organization, UNO. UNO is the largest Hispanic community-based organization in metropolitan Chicago. Since becoming Chief Executive Officer in 1996, our guest today has sought to refine UNO's mission to these three things. Number one, honor immigrant roots and values. Number two, challenge Hispanics to reach their full potential. And number three, facilitate their assimilation as our nation's newest Americans. Under his leadership, UNO has become, number one, the single largest charter school and management company in Illinois, 13 by year's end. Number two, the largest national Hispanic charter school operator. And number three, UNO charter schools serve more than 7,000 students nationwide. Our guest today earned his bachelor's degree from Northeastern Illinois University. Ladies and gentlemen, Juan Rangel. Juan?
Thank you very much, Jay. Thank you very much to Paul Green, who's a good friend of UNO and good friend of mine. Also like to recognize, although they already were mentioned, just Alderman Joe Moore, who we're opening up a school in his ward this year at the former St. Scholastica. We're very proud to be a partner of yours. And Alderman Ray Suarez, we're still looking around for a site for a school in your ward as well, but he's also been very supportive of us. To Veronica Alanis, our board chairperson, who's always been extremely supportive of me and UNO, does a tremendous job as our board chair. And also to the folks at the Board of Education. Without their support, we would not be opening up all those charter schools, and specifically to Vice President Jesse Ruiz and Mr. Rod Sierra for your support. So thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody, and thank you to the City Club for having me here for a fifth time. And it's always an honor to be here. The first time I was given an opportunity to address this body, it was 2008. And if you think about it, much has changed since then. Think about it. Barack Obama was still our U.S. Senator. Richard M. Daley was still our mayor. Rod Blagojevich was still your governor. And Rahm Emanuel was a Northside congressman, not yet chief of staff to the President of the United States, let alone our mayor. Yes, much has changed since then, much except the state of public education, which is a topic of discussion today in my remarks. Not that things haven't improved, they have. They just haven't improved enough for tens of thousands of children, families, and communities across Chicago. And it's not that attempts haven't been made to aggressively tackle the most challenging and most important issue facing our city and our nation. It's just that we haven't been aggressive enough. In fact, since former Mayor Daley took office in 1989 to the present, major education reforms have been enacted to improve the schools for Chicago's over 400,000 students. And you may recall some of these. The advent of local school councils, the decentralization of the system, the re-centralization of the system, mayoral control, school takeovers, school turnarounds, school closures, Paul Vallis's Reconstitution, Arnie Duncan's Renaissance 2010, Ron Huberman's data-driven education, contract schools, charter schools, and of course, the much heralded and controversial longer school day. Throughout these years, Chicago has been hailed in some quarters as the capital of school reform and vilified by others as the worst example of public school privatization, which, as some people see it, only leads to greater segregation between the have and the have-nots, and to the eventual collapse of the school system for the poor. 87% of the students at CPS come from low-income families, 87%. Of the entire student population, a 44.1% plurality is now Latino. 41.6% are African American, 8.8% white, and 3.4% Asian. Now, all those reforms that have been attempted in what may have appeared to be the most aggressive pace for change in public schools in the country, but in reality, it really was, as it turned out to be, a change at a snail's pace. But let's be clear. The reason for such a slow pace of reform in the past 2 decades is that each reform measure that has been introduced has been met with strong opposition from powerful forces protecting their adult interests. How dare we introduce parent choice in the public schools through charter schools? How wrong-headed to suggest that teachers ought to be evaluated based on their performance. How can a longer school day possibly help a child? What do you mean fire adults for their failure to educate children? Data-driven accountability, merit pay, student testing, and the list of complaints against school reform goes on. Never mind the children languishing in mediocrity called a public school. The ongoing labor negotiations between CPS and the Chicago Teachers Union, and especially the pending announcement today from the Teachers Union that they have decided to issue a 10-day strike notice 5 days before the first day of school, is evidence of that. For adults to even consider opening school next Tuesday for hundreds of thousands of children who are eager to begin their school year ready to learn after a long summer break, only to have the adults pull the rug underneath them by closing down their school a week later, is totally irresponsible and reckless behavior. We should expect more from adults, and we certainly should expect more from the educators of our youth. But with all the pro and con talk of school reform over the years, and with all the apparent aggressiveness in its pursuit, with every new initiative that has been introduced and the opposition that has ensued, the proverbial needle only inched forward slightly. Some have used this fact to make their case as to why we need a new approach to reform, why we should abandon some of the successes, as few and far in between as they may have been, why we should eliminate the charter school system altogether. Never mind that most of these schools continue to outperform their neighborhood counterparts. Why we should not pursue merit pay, why we should ban standardized testing to measure progress, or how we should not bring a new breed of teachers into the system like Teach for America, or even why we should not make the school day longer for children. In order to derail reform, some have even argued for further politicizing the schools by introducing the elected school board concept. The detractors of school reform question our motives and attempt to position themselves as solely seeking a better school day. But the answer to those detractors is not to wince, withdraw, or even second-guess ourselves. The real question that needs to be asked is not to our detractors, but to the school reform community. Whether you are a charter school advocate, a charter school operator, a non-traditional TFA, Teach for America teacher, a champion for standardized tests, a proponent for a longer school day and a longer school year, a promoter of results-oriented accountability and merit pay, a political action committee that supports reform-minded candidates, a political leader who is tired of seeing their schools undermine their own strategies to improve their community, or even if you are a private philanthropic billionaire who supports school reform and is willing to provide millions of dollars to improve our schools. The real question to all of us is whether we have the continued will and the appetite for an even more aggressive path and push towards systemic, structural, far-reaching, and long-lasting reforms in public education. Do we have the bold vision to truly challenge the status quo on how we educate children, how we think of the schoolhouse and its uses, how we define or maybe even redefine a quality teacher, and how we hold each other accountable for real results, not feel-good strategies? Do we have the political will to make the hard call on school closures and school turnarounds and move with a real sense of urgency and decisive action? Do we have the interest to organize a parent community, which is caught in a dependent cycle of a failed school system that they may consider the norm, but who in their hearts yearn for something better for their children? Do we have the resolve to embrace Chicago's wealthy community, the Rawners, the Pritzkers, the Searles, the Crowns, and support them as a focused source of energy that fuels the school reform movement with their money? Or will we shy away from them and allow the silly talk that currently passes for debate about the so-called one percenters privatizing our schools? Do we have the tenacity to redouble our efforts to truly change things for over 123,000, yes, that's 123,000 students who still remain in failing schools in spite of the efforts over the past 2 decades? Or will we cave to the hate mongers and their heightened rhetoric and public actions against school reformers? Will we instead hide our heads in the sand from the name-calling, the protests, the pickets, from short-sighted individuals who see their immediate self-interest as job preservation first over the self-interest of our city and its future? Excuses cannot suffice. Rationalizing failure is a non-starter. Sacrificing children to protect adult interests cannot be the norm or the standard for improving public education for Chicago's 404,151 students. So we can lay down and be enablers to failure, or we can choose to answer the call, a call to action, with greater determination and focus to ensure that our children and our communities are given a chance to succeed. And to be honest, where I stand and from my experience, we don't have a choice. To do otherwise would be criminal. Thank you.
Not bad. Here's Miss Brenda. I'm sure many of you want to write questions criticizing what Juan just said. I could only imagine the aggravation. Karen Lewis here, please.
That was really a low.
Take it easy, Ed. Take it easy, Ed. You're with adults. Okay, take it easy, Ed. Take it easy. Okay, any other questions? Well, Juan, this has never happened before. You want to raise your hand and talk, that's okay. Well, on behalf of the City Club of Chicago, I know the Debate Society, we have a question. From, well, I have to read it, it's the only one we got. H. Tristan, your remarks remind me, you ready? Your remarks remind me of Governor Chris Christie's view on education in New Jersey. He is a leader in performance, pay, etc. for teachers. Why has the Republican Party made more inroads with Latino? Why hasn't the Republican Party made more inroads with the Latino community?
I don't know about Chris Christie. He actually gave a speech yesterday at the Republican convention, and I'm actually going to be at the Democratic convention. So it's a big difference. And to be honest, I think that when it comes to education reform, the interesting thing is that both parties are pretty much aligned. Which makes things interesting considering that our president is a Democrat, had tremendous support from the unions, yet he is a strong proponent of everything that I've just mentioned: charter schools, standardized testing, all these things. And so on that front, I think we're pretty much even, Democrat and Republican, which is a good thing. I think we're aligned on that end. I think when it comes to the Latino community and the Republicans, I think that they I've criticized both parties on that, and I think that I've said this before this group. I think Hispanics have a tremendous opportunity to get ahead and be the next successful ethnic group in this country. We're very much like the Irish and the Polish and the Italians and everybody else that came before us, looking for the one thing that this country offers, and that's solely opportunity. And they have the right attitude, the right work ethic, family values, and all that. I think the big difference of how our community is viewed is not as an immigrant group or as an ethnic group, but we have the distinction of being considered a minority, and that changes the whole trajectory as to where we're going. The word minority is a loaded term. I don't think the Irish or the Polish or all these guys ever saw themselves as a minority. They just knew that things were tough and they're going to work hard and get ahead. I think that's the attitude that the Hispanic community brings with them. But the minute you're saddled with this other term and what that might mean to people, I think that's a challenge to our community. And there's a strong effort to box and pigeonhole our community in that way. I think overall, I think the traditions and the enthusiasm that people come here with to get ahead, to work hard, be willing to work hard and get ahead, will trump any kind of label that people give us. I think that's where the Democrats may be wrong, because I think they like to see minorities in a certain box, and I don't think we fit that category. And as I've said before, I think Republicans start believing that, so they start thinking, oh, here comes another minority group, blah, 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 and all that, and they're missing an opportunity as well. I think if they saw it, I said this to somebody before, I think, I don't know how it'll go down with this crowd, George Bush and Karl Rove actually had it right. I think back then, they were attempting to build bridges in the Latino community, knowing that they only needed 40-something% of the Hispanic vote to change the political dynamic of the country. Then 9/11 happened and all that, and I think the party has just lost, the Republican Party has lost its way on that end, and it may be to the detriment of Mitt Romney this fall, because it'll be a very close election. So.
Hey, Ron, we have not a flurry, but we have some.
Should have quit while I was in there.
Well, that will make your answers a little shorter. David Namkung, Clarity Partners, where are you, David? Okay. Of the reforms that you discussed, what style of reform would you want CPS to focus on?
Well, I think that the reality is that after everything that's been done at CPS, and if I have a criticism of CPS, notwithstanding our guests here, is that it hasn't been aggressive enough. It gives the appearance of aggressiveness. You hear school closures, and of course that's going to be a tough one for anybody, for the teachers, for the parents, and for the kids. But the reality is that we just can't leave that alone. We have to make the change, and I don't think they've moved hard enough and fast enough in addressing some of those issues of school closures and turnarounds. And as hard as it is, and these guys will get all the flack, they're going to get all the protests out there, but the question is, do we want to change things or do we want to leave it alone? We can leave it alone, but we'll all pay the price for it long term. And I think we saw that even under Mayor Daley. I'm a big supporter of Mayor Daley, always have been, but even that was not aggressive enough. And I think today we're in a situation where the budget doesn't allow us to just leave things well enough. Our test scores don't allow us to leave things well enough. So if we're serious, we have to move more aggressively. So I would say that.
A couple more questions. That's all we can take. All of a sudden, there's a flood. Here.
They're bashful.
Yeah. Lou Collins. Where are you, Lou? Right over there. Former president of IIT. Sitting next to Charlie. Okay. Please comment on the CTU claim that charter schools drain resources from CPS.
It's not true.
You sure know how to make a shorter answer. Okay. I can't read the first name. I think it's your question. Trevin? Tom. Tom. How does the average citizen get involved and help school reform?
I'll tell you, I think you can be supportive of your elected officials that are pushing for school reform. I think it's a tough call. The alderman and everyone else is going to get the complaints and all that for the tough decisions that need to be made. And I think we need to stand by them at all different levels. If you are wealthy money people, you ought to support them financially because they're going to make the tough calls. If you're a voter in their wards and they're making the tough calls on some of the turnarounds, some of the closures, charter schools and all that, be supportive of them. Let them know that that they're doing the right thing and be very vocal about it. Being the silent majority doesn't win here. You have to be vocal about your support, and I think that would go a long way.
Okay. A hardball and then a softie. Hardball. I don't know, but this S. Welcome, is that a real name or is this anonymous? I'm not. All right, well, it's okay. Please elaborate on the zoning fight for your school on the north side. Ooh.
That's the softball or the hardball?
That's the hardball. The softball's coming up.
The zoning change. I'll tell you, that was, we had tried to acquire property. We acquired property on the north side in the 36th ward. That's Alderman Nick Sposado's ward. He's a freshman alderman. We had met with him with the idea that we would build a new school at no expense to the city or CPS. This was money that we were able to get from the state to build schools across the city to alleviate overcrowding. He was supportive. He wanted to be very supportive. The reality for him is that he has supporters within the teachers union, and in good faith, we walked together to try to move this issue, and only to be confronted with tremendous opposition from the teachers union. But I'll tell you, I'll use that as an example. And let me make one point about Alderman Sposado. Even though at some point we were kind of locking heads, and certainly the Chicago Tribune wrote two outstanding editorials in support of us, Alderman Sposado had always been, the first thing in his mind was always his community. He was always interested in making sure that his community was taken care of in terms of kids that would be allowed to come into the school, any opportunities for contractors, workers to come in and bid from his community. So he always put his community first. It's just that it got caught up in a much bigger battle with the Chicago Teachers Union and the Board of Ed. But I'll use that as an example of what I was talking about earlier, when adult interests get in the way. And here we are, this was December 2011, and we were actually doing battle with a union against the construction of a brand new grammar school in a severely overcrowded Hispanic neighborhood. And I just could never understand how that could be. Why would people be opposed to the construction of a grammar school? And as I said time and again, I would have had an easier time if I was trying to get zoning for a new bar or a strip joint. It was a grammar school. But there was ardent opposition from teachers. This is 2011, 2012. Where are we? This is almost tantamount to segregation back in the old days down in the South, where Hispanics are in severely overcrowded conditions in our schools, and we're trying to address a real problem in our neighborhoods. But to have a union, teachers, educators come out and just very hard against this idea, that's just crazy. And at some point we need to have just a level-headed conversation. Just what are we trying to do here? Okay? And I don't believe that the teachers union is trying to keep our community, the Hispanic community, from progressing or anything like that. I don't believe it's racism, although some of the comments that were up there were pretty close, pretty close. I think they have an interest, a very strong interest as a union, and rightly so. That's their job. But let's not confuse what we're trying to do at the end of the day, which is improve the education for kids.
Well, let me give you, there are no more questions. We're overflowing here. Let me give you the softball. This comes from the Metropolitan Leadership Institute. I think you've heard of that organization? Yeah. That's theirs. Rosa Zamora. Where are you, Rosa? There you are. Juan, in your address, you mentioned the needle has not moved. What do we need to do that is not being done to move the needle? You said it, but...
Yeah. It's, I said it before, I think it's just we have to make the tough calls. There's decisions, tough decisions that the Board of Ed has to make. They're not pretty, they're not fun. It's going to shake up the system if they're truly serious about moving the needle in the right direction more aggressively. And I think the rest of us need to be very supportive, as hard as those decisions are. Yeah, it's basically that. I think there's decisions that need to be made at the board. That means school closures. That means, it's a hard thing. To turn around a school, that means firing every adult in that building. That is not an easy thing. But somehow we got to change things, to leave the culture that exists in some of our schools. And I know it. Look, right now, there's a protest outside the Little Village School of Social Justice. That's just a few blocks from my house, right? Because that school, brand new school 10 years ago. But it's been a miserable failure. Miserable failure. To do nothing would be criminal, as I said earlier. So what's the Board of Ed doing? They're taking everybody out. New principal, new teachers and all that. You have adults organizing children, which I've always been against. I don't believe in organizing kids. You organize adults, not the children. But you have kids doing walkouts and all that. Those are realities, right? I think the adults have to be more responsible. What do we need to do to fix that school? And that's just one. As I said earlier, there's 123,000 kids across the system in failing schools.
Okay, we have two more questions. Two of these have already been answered. Let me give you the real hardball question. Christian G, where are you? All right, you're not a member of the City Club. Normally, we don't take those questions. It's very democratic here, but with a small d. This is going to be here we go. According to Christian G, you received $98 million from the state. Why are there no UNO charter schools outside Chicago?
Thank you. Yes, we did receive $98 million from the state of Illinois, thanks to many supporters, aldermen included, the state rep, state senator, the governor, speaker of the House, everyone involved, and it's to alleviate overcrowding. And a lot of people think, well, how come they're getting all this money and while other schools are starving? Well, that money is for construction. And we've done a pretty good job at building schools pretty quickly. In fact, the school that Alderman Sposato will be kicking off next week, in his ward, we broke ground in February. That school will be up and running. It's almost complete. We have a few days to go. That's record time. Why we don't have schools outside of Chicago, one is I think that there's still confusion out in the suburban areas as to what charter schools are. There are a few downstate and in the suburbs, but I think the politics, the politics of the schools are just a little bit tougher, a little bit more complicated than they are in Chicago. So we'd love to go out there. There's a lot of, there's a big need.
Okay, well, maybe with two more. This one is a little bit off the subject, and you could skip it because Congressman Gutierrez could answer this one in 25 to 30 minutes. How can we help the tens of thousands of undocumented high school grads go to college?
You know, a lot of people talk about the undocumented students, and you saw the big turnout out in Navy Pier a few weeks ago on this Obama's deferred action. But I'm very much in support of the president's action, and I think we should encourage our youth, but be very cautious in taking advantage of deferred action. But the reality is that, the unfortunate reality is not that their legal status is what keeps them from going to college. Like, we have to be very honest here. When you have a 50+% dropout rate across the city, believe me, 50+% are not all illegal. There's a lot of kids, more kids that are legal U.S. citizens, U.S. residents, that could go on to college, they can do all the things that the undocumented don't have, yet they're still dropping out at great numbers. So let's not confuse things. The undocumented is an issue. I think we need to address it. I think we need to be supportive and try to move them through this deferred action process. But don't be confused whether that's the magic answer or solution to getting them to college. There's just a lot more that are legal U.S. citizens and our students in our school system that are failing as well.
Okay, last question. Anonymous. They ask a lot of questions around here. How will the increase in Latino students, now you're saying almost 50% in Chicago, 44%, in CPS change the policies and cultural dynamic of CPS? That's the last question.
Yeah, I don't think that it needs to change. I think what's good for one group is good for all of them. If you have a strong culture, discipline, a structured environment for kids, who cares what their race or ethnicity is? It's good for kids. I wouldn't say that there's a solution for one group over the other. I think we're lax all across the board. So.
How about a round of applause? We got